Yes, Geordies, welcome back to another episode. The first thing is always, I hope everyone's well, but isn't it nice? Isn't it nice just to wake up after a 4-0 convincing win in the Champions League, which just so happened to be our biggest win in the Champions League, our first win in the Champions League. That just builds up confidence going to Nottingham Forest on the weekend. Yesterday, I sat and I'd done a tactical video on everything I wanted from Eddie Howe when we played Dan Burn at left back, but yet last night, he did exactly what I wanted. So in this video, we are going to do a different tactical video. I'm going to talk about the difference from the Arsenal game to the Union Saint-Gilloise game and that one tweet Eddie Howe made that just affected the whole game. And then I want to talk about if we can evolve as a team. Can we play out from the back now that we've got Malik Chow and Sven Botman who are more comfortable in possession? So the two tactics I want to talk about is an inverted fullback, but also give you an idea where the same principles happen, but you don't actually have to invert a fullback. Now, I really do hope you enjoyed this video because I'm not going to lie, this is what I love to talk about. Figuring out different tactics, how you can counteract the opposition, beat the opposition, figuring out a way where you can get the best out of your players. And I think Eddie Howe did that against Union Saint-Gilloise. So let's look at the most obvious thing he done. And the most obvious thing he done is he made the pitch big. He provided natural width in our squad, which give our 11 a lot more balance. Now, if you look at our average positioning against St. Union Gilloise to Arsenal, we were a lot more narrow against Arsenal. When you play narrow, that is easier to defend against. Now, I understand why we were a lot more narrow, because undoubtedly Arsenal were going to have more possession. But I've often spoke about keeping players in advanced areas to hurt the opposition. And that's exactly what we did against St. Union Gilroy last night. So here's just a quick recap of what's coming up in today's video. We're going to talk about how we played last season and then what we did differently against St. Union Gilroy because we had Dan Burn at left back. That one change changes the dynamics of our team. And I spoke about this against Arsenal. I said, when we play Dan Burn at left back, we need to get natural width from somebody else. Now, there's different ways you can do that, and I'm going to break that down in this video. And then I want to talk about the purpose of an inverted fullback and what that does and how that helps you play out from the back. But I'm also going to give you another example where you don't have to invert a fullback. So let's just talk about it, because the very first thing I want to do is talk about how we set up and what Eddie Howe wants from his players, especially last season. So this is how we're set up against St. Union Gilroy. And as you can see, Nick Pope was in goal. We had Dan Burns, Sven Botman, Malik Chow, and Trippier right back. Joe Linton, Sandro Tonali, and Bruno in the middle. And then we had Gordon, Walter Messi, and Elanga up front. Okay, so let's quickly talk about what we were doing against Arsenal, but not really playing to our strengths. Because remember how I talk about profiles and partnerships create a successful team? This profile and partnership doesn't really complement each other unless you play a specific way. So firstly, let's have a look at how Eddie Howe likes to set up. So what Eddie Howe wants, especially last season, is our left winger was the one that came in and supported the striker. Our right winger was the one that provided width, and that gave our left back the freedom to be dynamic down that left-hand side. So he was the guy that provided width all the way through last season. That's why when Tino Livramento played at left back, he looked better going forward, because what we did last season was Tino Livramento provided the width, and then Joe Linton covered in these areas. So Joe Linton was the one that was protecting that space. That's why when you play as a right back and you're providing width on the right back, you don't have that same protection. And that's why Tino Livramento looked better on the left-hand side than he did on the right-hand side, even though he's naturally a right footer. But the very first thing I want to say, actually, because a lot of people are saying this in the comments, they're saying, why don't we play Lewis Hall at right back, Tino Livramento at left back? Why? Why would we do that? Lewis Hall is naturally a left back and Tino Livramento is naturally a right back. Our right wing is completely different dynamics to our left wing. Lewis Hall wouldn't play the same way if he was to come at right back, because the system is different, and I will tell you exactly why. But also, a left footer isn't as comfortable on the right-hand side as a right footer on the left-hand side. For some reason, and these just might be body dynamics, that a right footer is better with his left foot than a left footer is better with his right foot. For some reason, the majority of the time in football, that is often the case. I don't know if it's about the coordination or the angles, but I feel much more comfortable when a right back is going into left back than when a left back is going into right back. I don't know if you feel the same. That's just my personal preference. But let's have a look at what we expect from our right back, left back, and why they look better on the left-hand side getting forward. Because remember when I spoke about Anthony Gordon tucking inside? So this was Alexander Isak last season, but Anthony Gordon or Harvey Barnes often occupied these areas, whereas Jacob Murphy often occupied this area. So naturally, the right back doesn't have as much space to operate when he's overlapping, whereas the left back, when they move into this area, They've got all this space to operate in, and that's how they create 2v1s in that wide area. But when they do get forward, they've also got that protection from Joe Linton, whereas Bruno Guimaraes didn't really offer that protection in these areas. So the problem with playing Dan Burn at left back, he's naturally a centre back, so he doesn't offer you that width. He's not so comfortable going into them areas. So when we were playing against Arsenal, Anthony Gordon was caught in two minds, because when he inverts, where's the space where you can punish the opposition? Out here. So Anthony Gordon's thinking, I need to come inside and support my striker, but also that's where the space is. I'll get more freedom on the ball in this area, and that's where I can cause the most damage. Because the way you punish the opposition, especially in nowadays football, because nowadays football, there's a lot of defensive shape. A lot of teams are so good at getting back into their shape. So the way you punish the opposition, one, when you're playing out from the back, you need to create overloads, but also you need to find a way of getting your best positions in some freedom. And when I speak about freedom, I often say you want your players to have freedom. Freedom doesn't mean just running all over the pitch like a headless chicken. What it means is a manager needs to have an idea of getting your best players into dangerous positions in space. And then once he's in that space, that's when he has the freedom to really improvise and find solutions on how he can punish the opposition. So a manager's purpose is to get his best players into advanced areas in space, because once they're in space, that's when they can truly bring out their qualities. So when you speak about manager showing freedom, that doesn't mean he can roam anywhere. It's about having an idea of getting them into space where they can punish the opposition. And that's exactly what I'm going to talk to you about in this tactic. But what we did against Saint-Gilloise, which was different against Arsenal, we had our winger providing width. So when you play with a natural centre-back, a fullback, you need somebody providing width. You can do that in two ways. You can still have Anthony Gordon coming inside, but that means Joe Linton needs to be the one providing width. You can keep Anthony Gordon providing the width, and you do this. If Nick Walter-Messi drops deep, you have inside runners like that. So there's a couple of ways you can do it, but the biggest difference against Saint-Gilloise to Arsenal is we had natural width on that left-hand side. So we weren't as compact. It's so difficult to defend against because now you've created space. You've created space between the fullback and the centre-back on both sides. So natural width in football is crucial. So I often speak about keeping players in advanced positions. Now, when you've got a profile like Nick Walter-Messi, you need bodies running behind from different areas. So by creating width, you've stretched out the opposition. So by Gordon creating width and Anthony Elanga creating width, you've got two options. You can have these penetrating through the lines this way, or you can have these guys attacking the space that way. Because Nick Walter-Messi instinct is to drop deep. So you need to get runners in behind him. Otherwise, everything's going to be in front of the opposition and everything's going to be really comfortable for them. Now, the issue about playing Dan Burn at left back is that Dan Burn isn't very comfortable supporting the width. So against Arsenal, we got caught in two minds. Gordon was caught in two minds. Does he come inside, support Nick Waldemurda? And if he does so, the space that we create, where we can create an overload, a 2-on-1, is in this place. Now, Dan Burn doesn't have the profile to act like a winger or a wing back. So he was staying relatively back. So then Gordon was thinking, right, the space is there, so I'll go back out wide. And then it was leaving Nick Waldemurda isolated. So that is the problem we had when we were attacking against Arsenal. So how do you solve that problem? Well, you can definitely play with the same players, but you just play a little bit differently. And what you do is you ask your wingers to be wingers. So they provide width. And the reason why you want to provide width on the pitch is because it opens up the game. It creates space in central areas. And then once you create space in central areas, that gives more freedom for Joe Linton and Bruno to attack the box. So you either need to get players attacking your box and running behind from your wingers, or if they're touchline wingers, you need it from your midfielders. So what you need to do is find a solution to your problem. Now, one of the biggest problems and why our dynamics have changed is because Nick Waldemurda is not the same profile as Alexander Isak. Alexander Isak's movement was so impressive. He used to run the channels for us, which ultimately forced the opposition backwards, which created space in the middle of the pitch. And once you get space in the middle of the pitch, that's where you can damage the opposition a lot more. But when you've also got players running off the last line, that gives you options to move the ball forward when you're in possession. Now, for managers, in my opinion, football can be simple, but it can also be beautiful. Moving the ball forward but with purpose. Now, when you've got possession of the ball, ideally what you want to do, you want to penetrate through the lines, but how do you do that? You want to do that by creating overload. You can create overloads in wide areas, you can create overloads in central areas, but the way you beat the press is by creating overload. However, the biggest choice, in my opinion, what Eddie Howe needs to do, is it Nick Pope or Aaron Ramsdale? Because that ultimately decides how you're going to play. Nick Pope doesn't have the composure or the technical ability to play out from the back, whether that be go long or short. However, Aaron Ramsdale does, but so does Malik Chow and Sven Botman. Ideally, what do you want to do when you're playing out from the back? You want to bait the opposition out of their position, which creates space higher up the pitch for your more creative and better players and more technical players to get on the ball where they can punish your opposition. So how do you do that? You need players that are comfortable, composed in possession. So let's take a look at the tactical board again, because I want to break it down exactly how you can do it, because your playing out from the back depends on what the opposition do. What I'm trying to say is playing out from the back doesn't mean you need 80 odd passes, you need to keep possession for 70% of the game. That doesn't mean you're playing out from the back. Playing out from the back can be going direct, and I'm going to show you exactly what I mean, because ideally what you want to do is create an overload. Now, you can create an overload in many different ways. You can invert a fullback, you can invert a winger, you can move a centre-back into midfield, but the most common way teams are doing it right now is inverting a fullback. So let's talk about inverting a fullback. Newcastle don't really do this, but this is an option we could do, because inverting a fullback pretty much means that a fullback goes into midfield. So let's talk about that, because what you do is, the Chelsea do this all the time. So let's use Chelsea as an example, because when you're inverting a fullback, the main principle is to create space to do that. And you create space by having touchline wingers. This is what I was talking about. Profiles and partnerships create a successful team. This is why Chelsea are signing a lot of wingers. They want their wingers to be touchline wingers. So what happens in this instance is, in possession, you want to create a box shape in the middle, because you're creating a 4 against 3 in the middle of the pitch, and that is the main purpose. So remember how I said attacking with 5, defend with 5? You've got your 5 attackers, you've got your 5 defenders. And the purpose of that, so you've got enough bodies in the final third where you can create opportunities and punish the opposition. But also, if you did lose possession, you've got at least 5 bodies to defend the opposition's counter-attack. So that is ideally how Chelsea set up. Now, the purpose of this is, depending on the opposition's press, is how you play. So, for example, let's get a press out here. So let's bring the opposition in. So for argument's sake, let's say the opposition are going man for man here. As you can see, Sven Botman's on the ball. He doesn't really have an option. So what you need to do is be composed enough to bait the opposition out of their shape. And the way you do that is by having a goalkeeper who is very comfortable in possession. And the purpose of that, because you need to create your first overload. To create your first overload, you need an extra man somewhere. So the goalkeeper will step into the line of defense. There's your 4-on-3. Now, this guy's got a decision to make. If he goes and closes the ball down, he plays it off to the goalkeeper. That entices him. And then you beat that first line of press and you're away. He'll come in there and that creates him that spare. So you beat that, and then he'll either come across or he'll drop in here, depending on which. Creates an overload here or an overload here. It's like a domino effect. Let's say if he closes the ball down, then you play the ball into here. He's going to close the ball down, then you play the ball into here. Then you've got your 2v1 in this area instead of your 4 against 3 in this area. So it's all about a domino effect, but it's also having the players that are comfortable enough in possession to receive the ball under pressure, turn away from the pressure, which opens up a passing angle into the spare man. So that is one way of doing it. Now, if the opposition are really having an aggressive press and they create a 4 against 4 in this situation, this is where you don't play out from the back. This is a situation where you find the spare man, and that's either going to be in this target. So if we create a little pass into there, so he's got the capabilities of playing the ball into there, and then you play from there. Or if he's marking him, then your spare man is going to be Sandro Tonali. So it's all about creating that overload, but it's also about making the right decision in possession. So your pass selection from that first moment has to be on point. This is why you need keepers that can see the whole pitch, are comfortable baiting the press, and are technically good enough to find a man in possession. Now, Chelsea always do it in many different ways as well, because it's not all about the midfielders, because what they can do in this instance, let's say if they've had an inverted fullback and their striker is a one-on-one here. What if their striker wants to come deep and create an opportunity to create space? This is how you create space. So let's say Chelsea striker João Pedro, for example, drops into this area. He's got a decision to make, because if he goes with them, that means you've created space here. What does that mean? That pass from this guy is available here. That means your wingers can curve their runs to receive the ball in this area. So it's all about creating space and having players aware of the space and exploiting the space. But the thing is, you don't always have to invert a fullback to create that overload. You can do it in many different ways, and you can do it by creating two number 10s. This is probably what suits Nick Voldemurda a little bit more. Now, Eddie Howe would have an option here. Does he want Joe Linton as part of the 4, or does he want Anthony Gordon as part of the 4? If it's Anthony Gordon acting as a number 10, you need to do this. And that means Joe Linton has to be the one providing width, because if he doesn't provide that width, it doesn't stretch him out. But you've also, there's your overload, because you've got your back 4. You haven't inverted a fullback, but what you've done is inverted a winger. That means Joe Linton is one of the 3 needs to provide the width, because if nobody's providing that width, then he's just going to tuck in here like this, and everything's going to be too compact. So you need to provide that width to open up the space. But again, if the opposition are going into an aggressive press, so he's marking him, he's marking him, he's marking him, he's marking him, the goalkeeper can step into this back 4, create a 5 against 4. So previously it was a 4 against 3. This time it's a 5 against 4. Now the reason he does that is because he's now become the spare man. So what he needs to do is have so much composure, he baits some of the press. So whether that be him coming in from here, or him coming in from here, or him coming in from here, depending where they press from is where we make our decision. If it's him coming in from here, then you've got to pass in to Sandro Tonali. If it's Jesus coming in from here, then you've got to pass into Botman, and that opens up the game. However, the purpose of it is to find one of these in space. Now, one of my favorite sayings in football is don't receive on the same line. And I'm going to talk to you exactly what I mean by that. Let's say Saka presses Nick Pope, and Nick Pope plays into Fabian Shaw. What will happen here is either this winger will come into the ball. If so, you've got to pass to Tino Livramento. So you've always got that option in possession. Or the centre midfielder will close down Fabian Shaw. You've got to pass to Bruno Guimaraes. So once you play the ball to Bruno Guimaraes, but this is important because you can find Bruno Guimaraes in different ways. Now, if Bruno Guimaraes and Sandro Tonali are on the same line, it's going to be very difficult to move the ball in an advanced area. So what needs to happen in this instance, if Bruno Guimaraes drops in this area to create an angle, Sandro Tonali has to drop here instead of here to create an angle. Because what that happens on this instance is, let's say Bruno drops into that area. Sandro Tonali needs to go into an advanced position, not in the same line as Bruno, because what that'll do is separate this guy, and that allows Sandro Tonali to receive in space because you can play off your one touch. If Sandro Tonali comes on the same line, he's just going to break up that play because you've created almost a triangle figure. And I'll point it out for you. So Fabian Shaw to Bruno, Bruno to Tonali allows you to receive higher up the pitch, but it also allows you to prevent him blocking out that passing angle. So it's all about fishing, attracting the pressure, and then breaking through the pressure. But depending on the opposition's press, depends on the way you play out from the back. Create triangles on the pitch. Because if Tonali goes this way and he's closing down the ball, you've created that triangle. Now that means Tonali can receive and penetrate through the lines. Now these guys have got a decision to make. Does he go towards the ball? If so, it leaves Nick Voldemurda free. If he stays with Nick Voldemurda, it's a duo. That push, Nick Voldemurda is going to push him back, which will allow Sandro Tonali to penetrate the ball into these dangerous areas. And eventually, the more Sandro Tonali moves the ball up the pitch, the more likely he is to go and close down the ball, and then your pass is available. So that is ideally how you want to play through the lines. Now, if the opposition are going into a complete aggressive press because you're playing through the lines too often, depending on the opposition's press, depends on your pass selection. So, for example, if the opposition are going into an aggressive press because you've played through the lines too often and they're like, we're sick of this, we're just going to press them aggressively, so don't give them time on the ball so they kind of pick out their options. That kind of works in your favor. Think of baiting the presses in like fishing. You're fishing for them to move out of their shape, because once they move out of their shape, that's where you can break. So, for example, if this forward goes and closes down the ball, but then he presses a centre-back, where's your free man? In the midfield. So it's not always playing to your centre-backs or your defenders. You can miss out that man. You can miss out this section here and go straight to there. If he's playing into there, where's your spare man? Into your striker. So you've packed out all of these out of the game. Now, this is where it gets important, because Remember what I was saying about movement and pace kills in football. If you've played with two strikers, this is a scenario where these strikers become two number 10. So what they'll do, what does Nick Waldemura want to do? He wants to drop deep, get in possession. This is where your fullbacks and your midfielders become important. Because what they have to do is, if Nick Waldemura is dropping deep and getting possession, when these guys jump. If they don't jump, you're not making the use of this space available to you. And that's why you're not hurting the opposition, because if he drops deep, if he's your spare man and he drops deep into this area to receive the ball, where's Nick Pope's option? His option's to play the ball into here. So it's all about exploiting the space that's available to you. Now, the thing is, he's not the same profile as Alexander Isak. Alexander Isak allowed us to go long because ideally, when he was a spare man, he was comfortable running these channels. Nick Waldemura is not that. So you've got to make somebody do that. So that is either when Nick Waldemura drops into these areas, you've got to have him curving his run into there. You've got to have Jacob Murphy curving his run into there. You've got to have Bruno running into there. You've got to have somebody exploiting that space. And that's how they get the opposition on the back foot. Now, against Arsenal and any other team, what have I spoken about the importance of having two wingers creating width? Because that is so important on how you create space in the middle areas. You need two wingers pinning their fullbacks backwards. And wingers can come from anywhere. Our right winger is our right winger. He acts like a pure and raw winger. Whereas Anthony Gordon comes inside. So you need a profile that complements Anthony Gordon and that is comfortable getting into wide areas, whether that be your fullback or whether that be your midfielder. And the reason why you create that width is to create more space for these guys, because he has a decision to make. And the reason why I say the wingers are so important in creating width, because you're going to give him a decision. Because let's say the opposition are going into an aggressive press again, right? These guys are going to drop deep. That's Nick Waldemura's. His instinct is to drop deep. Anthony Gordon can hover around this area, but even if Anthony Gordon's in this area, he's the guy that needs to do this. So the decision these guys have to make, do they drop with your two number 10s or do they not? Because if these guys do drop with your two number 10s like this, where's the space? The space is here. So that means your wingers can exploit this space, and you can do this so many times, because eventually you will get through, and that creates a one-on-one situation. However, sometimes if you're doing that too often, these two centre-backs will say, right, we're not coming with you. We're going to stay here and hold our shape. These guys will still go into an aggressive press because they don't want you playing up from the back. Where's the space? Here. These guys are sitting off you. So you need to be comfortable enough hitting those areas and allowing them to turn on the ball. Because once you turn on the ball in space, that's where you can punish your opposition. So it's all about finding a way of getting space in the final third. Now, for me, I don't like keeping possession for possession's sake. I don't like having 100 passes but not punishing the opposition. For me, the purpose of football is to play forwards and try and hurt the opposition. Now, you can do that many different ways. You don't need to consistently play from the back. You can create an opportunity just with two passes. And it's just by acknowledging what your teammates are going to do, but also making the most of the space that's afforded to you. There's always one goal in football, and that is to attack here. I don't like having the ball just for having the ball for purpose sake. There's always an idea, and the idea is to create space and find a way to create an opportunity. Now, you do that by creating space, and ideally you want the opposition to jump out of their position because that creates space. Now, if you play with two number 10s, right, ideally the midfielders are the most important in here because that's where the space is. You could even do this if you want to continue having Lewis Hall as the wide man, then you've got your three, but the midfielders are the most important here because that's where your overload is. You've got your two strikers, your two number 10s. This is ideally how Eddie Howe wants to set up. But if we actually want to play out from the back and create space, the main objective in this formation is to get those two jumping out of their position. Because once they jump out of their position, the space you create is here. And ideally, that's where you want to target. This is why when we had Alexander Isak, we were so effective because he had the ability to run into those spaces. Nick Waldemura doesn't have that pace or that explosiveness to do so. Now, I'm not criticizing him. It's just not his profile. So you need to release Anthony Gordon. Thing is, I love this setup because what you're doing here is you're testing the centre-backs. You're saying to them, are you going to let me play or are you going to come with me? However, when you let a winger come inside and play with your striker, you're asking these to go 1v1. So when I talk about movement and fluidity is key in football, it's all about moving the opposition out of their structure to create space for teammates to exploit. You do that with composure, and you do that by creating overloads. So Eddie Howe has a choice to make, and that choice is how he's going to create those overloads. Let's just remove Arsenal for a second, because I want to talk about Nick Voldemort and how we can get the best out of him, because Eddie Howe has got a choice to make how he does that. And the reason why I've just showed you what I've showed you is because that affects Nick Voldemort, because we all know his profile is to drop deep and link up play. Now, if we invert a fullback in the midfield, then you've got two options. So let's say Tino Livramento inverts in the midfield and we create that 4. Just like this. It can be any 4, just using that 4 for now. If Nick Voldemort drops in here, into these areas, then he's got bodies around him in terms of Joe Linton and Bruno Guimaraes. These are your wide players creating width, so they've got space to play in, so they can all connect together. It's all about connecting and occupying the right space. So if Nick Voldemort decides to drop even deeper, then you've still got your box shape. Now, Nick Voldemort has got bodies around him to help him when he receives possession. Let's say Ramsdale goes straight into him. But you've also got players and advanced players. So if he drops the ball off, then you've got players and advanced players to play the ball to and punish your opposition. Because remember, it's all about moving the ball into the final third. That is the objective of every play. However, we don't really invert a fullback. So the way we set up is Anthony Gordon tucks inside, Lewis Hall provides a width, Anthony Elanga provides a width. So you're looking a little bit like this. You're looking a little bit like that. Let's say if Malik Chow's got the ball. That is how we set up. We all know Nick Voldemort doesn't have the profile to run him behind. What he's going to do is create that angle. Remember, not in the same line. So then if he plays it at Tonali, he's got two options in terms of Bruno and Joe Linton. Now that that's out the way, where did Newcastle United do their best work? In transition moments and in broken play. Last season, we defended a lot in a 4-4-2. The reason we did that is because we always had players in advanced areas. So if we did manage to overturn the ball, we've got 2 targets to hit. Obviously, depending on where you overturn the ball and what the opposition are doing, will decide what you can do. But this season, what we've seen differently is we're defending pretty much. We did it sometimes last season, but not as much as this season, is that we're defending in a 4-5-1. So when we win the ball and we don't have the profiles, when you're playing with Dan Burn and Fabian Shaw at centre-back, who aren't really comfortable playing through the lines, and we're not really creating overloads because Dan Burn's playing at left-back and he's always tucking around, and Luis Livramento's trying to provide the width. We're struggling to play through the lines, and that's leaving Nick Voldemort isolated. So I actually think Eddie Howe's got a decision to make. Does he want to be a team that penetrates through the lines? And that doesn't mean we need over 70% possession all game, because creating overloads and playing out from the back doesn't mean that you're controlling possession. You can play through the back, have 2 passes before you get a shot off, because you've got the options to go direct. The purpose of playing out from the back is to move the opposition out of their position and allow you to create an overload. What does an overload do? That allows you to have a player that's technically very good receiving in open spaces. I'm going to leave it there because I am going to do more tactical videos during the international break. So if you've enjoyed this style of video and want to see more, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. And until next time, away the lads.